Coast to coast, border to border, and around the world, it's time for The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a guest-driven program where the topics are diverse and entertaining. Laugh and learn while you listen to one of the best hours of online radio. Now, here's your host, Bill Alexander.
Hi, everyone. Yours truly, William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill. Today, have a great guest for you who just wrote a book, and his name is Dean Butler. The name of the book is Prairie Man. If the name Dean Butler doesn't ring a bell, maybe the program Little House on the Prairie. How about Almanzo Wilder? Does that ring a bell? Well, when you see him, you'll know who it is. And that's the best part of it, because we've had the opportunity to talk to Allison Arngram a few months ago, which was a great conversation with her. And we have Dean Butler with us today.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's nice to be with you. And the book has been out it'll be a week tomorrow. And it's been, when you write a book, it's this full court press to the release, and then you just sort of have to see what happens after you put it out there. And I'm told by the publisher, because of the shorter week last week and then the holiday this week, that I won't really learn anything about how the book is doing until around July 12th, because that's when that first data will really become available. So I'm sort of I'm on pins and needles, waiting to hear if people who are liking it, and or if they're buying it, if they're reading it, or whatever. So it's an interesting process. It's not like television where the feedback is immediate,
right?
Where you get you have a number within minutes. Like how many people have been watching. With the book, I'm learning it's a different metric.
So what was the reasoning behind writing the book? Why did you decide that you needed to write one?
Back in 2022, as we were coming out of the pandemic, the reality of the 50th anniversary of Little House was starting to come into sharper focus for me. And I had been asked for years if I was going to ever write a book. And I was really reticent about doing this. I thought, it's Melissa's written a book, and Allison's written a book, and Karen's written a book, and Charlotte Stewart's written a book, and Ketty Lester's written a book, and even the two babies on the show, Allison, Wendy Lou Lee, and Jennifer Donati, who was Baby Grace and Baby Rose, respectively, they've written a book. Mitzi Francis, who played a character, Cassandra, who went on to have a great career at CNN and Fox News as a Fox Business, as an on-camera reporter, they've written books. Melissa Sue Anderson's written a book. And of course, in all of those names, the crescendo or the epiphany moment happens for me. I realize these are all women that have written about their experiences on our program. No men in the cast have actually written a book about the experience. And so I realized, with the 50th anniversary coming, with the reality that no men had written a book about this experience, knowing that Little House has a dominantly female demographic, I thought maybe this is the time. And that's really was the driver for me, was doing that. I mean, then you have to figure out what you want to try and talk about. But it became pretty clear to me that I could do this. I sent a proposal through my friend Mary McDonough, who was Aaron Walton on the Waltons, to Kensington Publishing in New York, to her editor. He called me the next day and made an offer, and this was in late 2022. Called me the next day and made an offer, and so it was kismet. And I said, okay, I'm off and running now. And so in January of 2023, I sat down with a hot cup of coffee and my computer on and my outline open, and off I went on the adventure.
I'll be honest with you up front, I never watched the series when it was new. I actually watched it in reruns with my wife because my wife was a big fan of the program growing up. And one Sunday afternoon after we first got married, that we were doing nothing. It was raining outside, and Little House was on, and I binge watched like 4 or 5 different episodes, and I realized going, this is really good television. I mean, we all knew Michael Landon from his days on Bonanza, and being able to do that, and now all of a sudden he's playing as a father on a program with his own children and growing up in the Midwest and the West and being able to take part of it, which was quite enjoyable. You came into the series how long into the production run of it?
So I came into it beginning at the start of the 6th season. So the show was a huge hit by the time, it was a massive hit. It was a hit right out of the box, but it was on very solid ground when I entered the program in the fall of 1979.
Okay.
And and then I was there for the remainder of the time. And it was just an incredible honor to be able to step into something. I mean, I was just pinching myself every day, Bill. I mean, to get an opportunity to be involved in something like this, I think one of the things that, and I remember this now, and I didn't write about it in the book, but I remember coming into September there in my little rented house in Burbank. I was renting a house in Burbank at that time. And I was watching The Tonight Show, and on comes Michael Landon sitting with Johnny on the couch. I mean, those great moments of Michael Landon and Johnny Carson on the couch. And Michael brings a clip of a scene that I'm in, and here it is rolling out on The Tonight Show. And I just remember being blown away that 4 months earlier I am completely anonymous, and on that one night Michael drops me in front of America on The Tonight Show, on the obviously the biggest late night program on television. He drops my name very nicely at the end of the clip. Johnny is very complimentary about the scene, and I'm thinking, wow, I have really arrived here. This is, it may be my only shot to get on The Tonight Show. And on that first, and I took it, I mean, I had nothing to do with it. Michael took the clip, but it was awesome to be introduced to America in that way.
So what was the age difference between you and Melissa Gilbert when you started? Because in the book, you said that you don't think something like that would happen today.
Yeah. So the age difference was 8 years. She was a very young 15. She had literally just turned 15 2 weeks before we met. Mm-hmm. And I had turned 23 literally 2 days before we met. So there was a really solid, just something less than 8-year difference between us. And it was a chasm of difference at that time. And because she was a young 15,
right?
In television terms, I mean, no one had ever done a casting like this before on a family-oriented television show of what was, for a huge percentage of the audience, an absolutely guaranteed romantic storyline.
Right.
People, if you hadn't read the books, they didn't know whether it was going to be a romantic storyline or not. But anybody who'd read the books knew when Almanzo Wilder was introduced, this was definitely going to be a love story. So it was a big bite to take. And I will tell you, no one in a family drama has ever done a casting like that since. It was a very rare, and I think only was really possible because it was in Michael Landon's hands, and he was strong enough to control it and his sensibility was such that he knew how to do it, in a way that would be palatable for the audience.
You also mentioned that there was a scene, one of the first scenes that you did with Michael Landon, that you did it and basically asked him or said, can we retake it again? And he stopped you and basically said, no, I know what good TV is. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but
yes, you are.
For me.
Yes, you are paraphrasing, Bill. It was and really, my question was much more benign than that. My question literally was that okay?
Yeah.
That was my question. This was my first scene, first shot, first hour on that set. And I was just, I was nervous. And so I asked him, as the executive producer, as the director, was that okay? And he really slammed the door on me. And he was teaching me an important lesson about working with him. And the lesson was, it was a harsh lesson, but the lesson was, you need to trust me. When I say cut print and I say it's good, it's good. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to think about it again. And it took me a while. I don't know that I ever got over, in the 5 years I worked with him, got over the harshness. And I literally did paraphrase it in the book. It was a very, it was a gut punch the way he handled it. But I understood very clearly that there was no reason or value in asking the question again, was that okay?
Right.
If Michael would shoot until he got what he wanted. And if he got it on the first take, he was completely prepared to walk away. And I was so inexperienced at that point, Bill, that I just didn't know I certainly didn't know how he worked. I'd been on other sets, but he worked so fast and so efficiently. And if he saw it, he got it. And that was that. And no questions were really wanted at that point, like, let's go next. And so it informed the way I worked with him for the next 5 years.
In the beginning of the book, you talk about working with Michael Landon, you talk working about Little House, but you also talk about your family and how you come from sturdy stock, which I thought was a way to introduce a chapter talking about it. And it talks about you growing up, and I don't want to say trials and tribulations, but it's basically what any kid would go through that may not have been an athlete or something like that, that was trying to find their own niche. And you found your niche with music, with the AV club, with wanting to act, because you saw it and you thought, hey, this is something that I want to do. Plus, I can meet girls. I mean, it's one of those. That's
a really important component in all the things we do as young men, is how do we meet girls?
Exactly. Yeah. I got into radio that way until I realized I was going to sit in a room and talk to myself. But
you could say to girls that you were on the radio, and that would maybe, exactly.
So you talk about that, and you talk about the family secret, I guess there was, about the wedding that happened earlier, before, when the birth of the child came along and everything else, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I think every family has one of those stories, especially at that time. But was it your father that was a little bit too much to drink that one night and decided he was going to tell the story?
Yeah, I was at the on the occasion of my first wedding, and it was at a reception, and he had to tell me the story, and I had no idea until he told the story then. It was very important for him, obviously, at that moment, for me to know this. And you're right. I think that there were, today, people can have children and not be married, and no one bats an eye about it.
Right.
At that point, and when I was born in 1956, it was okay or plausible or acceptable for a child to be conceived out of wedlock,
Right.
but should not be born out of wedlock. And so my dad needed me to know that. They were married before I was born, but they had gotten started before they were married. And that was sort of I mean, look, when all this was going on, I was living in a different time. I was coming of age in a very different era where, yes, maybe there would have been some concern about that, but really not so much. You could have had a child even when I was, into that part of my life, and there would not have been big pressure about being married. My father was, very much in that space. My parents both were, obviously.
So comparing your childhood, your family life to the family life on Little House on the Prairie, you drew some interesting parallels between that, about a great grandfather that wrote the history about, which I think is fantastic that someone had enough foresight to be able to write that stuff down about
Oh.
this is what we did and how we got to where we are today. But could you see the other parallels between the two, between the character you were playing and what was happening in real life?
Not at that time. I was just, when I was auditioning for Little House, I was a young actor, looking for an opportunity, and I was not at all thinking about, I just wasn't thinking about my background as I walked into those meetings. Later, years later, Bill, I came to realize that, and it's true for all actors, or anything we do, right? It doesn't matter whether it just maybe shows up more for people who are acting. But when we walk into a room, when we say hello to somebody, when we meet people for the first time, whether we realize it or not, we're carrying our whole lives in the door. We are showing our whole lives from head to toe. It's all there. It just depends on how observant someone is capable of being to see the totality of the package that's standing right in front of them. I think my life growing up as a fifth generation Californian, on a family ranch that was founded in 1885 by my great grandfather, growing up with no electricity on the place, no running hot water. We read at night by the light of coal-oiled lamps, and played games by lamplight, and told stories, and we cooked together and did dishes together, and we rode horses together during the days. And it was a dusty youth growing up in the country. And I think I had a lot of that dust on me, although I was really clean when I came into the room, but I had a lot of that dust on me when I walked into the room to meet with Michael. And I didn't even know how much dust I had on me. And I think that's just, but that was not in my thinking. I was a young actor walking into a room. I wasn't aware enough about casting to know that I was, in fact, carrying my life into the room with me. And they can see it, they can observe a lot about who's standing in front of them. And all of that stuff was in the room with me. And I'm very grateful for that.
When you talk about the people that you were working with Melissa Gilbert, Allison Arngrim, and everybody else, do you still have a close connection to them? Do you still talk? Do you still get along? I know that Allison has been doing a lot of these I don't want trade shows, these cons, these things going out where she's meeting the public. Have you done that also?
Yeah, no, we as a cast, we do a lot of that together. We do a great deal of it, and particularly in the most recent couple of years leading into this 50th anniversary, we've been out together a lot doing things. And so we've had a wonderful chance to renew relationships, confirm relationships. We're a pretty tight group. And, there are other shows that have this kind of common experience too. I think the fact that the program is bigger than any of us are. We were all a part of something that was very, very special. And I think we all have this awareness, this knowledge that what we did together was special. And we're connected by it. And I think there's nothing like, there's nothing like affection and adoration to connect people together. And we get this from thousands and thousands of people when we go out on events. It's astonishing that 50 years later, I mean, I think it sort of shocks all of us quietly, that after 50 years, there's this level of affection that exists for this.
Does it amaze you that it's still running in syndication, that it's 50 years later, there are people watching it for the first time that are getting introduced to the program, that in 1979, when you came on the program, could you see something like that happening 50 years later?
No, I couldn't have at all. I know, early on in my time, Michael Landon said to me between shots one day, people will be watching what we're doing long after we're all gone. Mm-hmm. Well, at 25 years old, that felt like hyperbole to me. I just didn't, when you're 25 years old, you're immortal. There's no life goes on after this goes on after we're all gone. I mean, I'm never going to be gone. Now, 40 years later or 45 years later from when he said this to me, at 68 years old, it's very clear to me, based on the way it seems to be going, that people are going to be watching this and loving this for a long, long time. Because, Bill, it was old when it was new. It was never hip and cool. It's never been out of fashion because it was never in fashion. It was always a world apart from the broader stream of mainstream pop culture. It touched on very important themes of pop culture, but did it in this very, very it was very romantic, but it wasn't edgy, it wasn't hip, it wasn't slick, it wasn't any of those things. It was so earnest, and people in the peace and quiet of their own homes, in the intimacy of their own lives, were in a place to receive that information. And it was just, it just washed over people like a warm spring rain. And I think people just loved it from at that point. And clearly they love it still, because I think it's just it's this salve, it's this safe place that maybe they don't get in their mainstream world, but they can have it in the peace and quiet of their home, or now on their phone, on their iPad, on their computer screen. They can watch it anywhere. And that's that's how it has evolved, but the stories don't change. The essential goodness and decency of what was being done then remains the same, and people continue to get it. I mean, look, it's not for everybody.
Oh, no.
It's clearly not. And Michael knew it wasn't for everybody. But for those who it is for, it's really for those people.
And I still occasionally watch it now, because flipping through the dial, and you go through it once or twice, you land on Little House, and you may know the dialogue and you may be able to predict what's happening next, but it's something that's comfortable and something that's safe and something that you can relate to. And I think that's important. So, Dean, with the book coming out, how long did it take you to write it? 2 years? Year and a half?
No, so I wrote it in 7 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So I wanted it to come out in the summer of 2024. That was, in my conversations with the publisher, that was really important. And he agreed. and said, fine, you can have it whenever you want it, but we need to have it a year before the public gets it. So, and we did the deal in the latter part of 2022. So we did the deal, and on January 10th, 2023, I started writing. And I was up at 5 a.m. every morning, and it was for a couple of hours every morning, sometimes less, sometimes more. Sometimes it was 1,000 words, sometimes it was 500 words, maybe it was only 250 words on certain mornings. But I moved through this outline, and when I turned in my first draft on July 31st, so a little less than a year from release, I had 220,000 words before, as I turned it in. What ended up being released is just over 93,000 words. So, there is, and gratefully, I had an editor following along right behind me, squeezing, tweaking, spinning, all the things that editors do that everybody works with. And it really made a huge difference. We were able to sort of cut away things, and we kept all of it, but we were honing it down as we were going. And I'm grateful that I was able to write the 220,000 words, and I'm grateful for what we took away. I've got a lot of stories that didn't make it into the book, but what did get into the book, Bill, I think was something that, and this was a book written for fans. This was a book written for fans of Little House and of 80s television. And, maybe, as I've said about the book, it's about a good life, good luck, good television, and the gloriously imperfect people who made it so. And so there's enough of all of it there, but it's definitely an entertainment for fans kind of story. People love 80s television and they love Little House. I think that there's a good opportunity for them to have an enjoyable experience reading this book.
So where can they find the book?
The book is available. Well, I want to tell you that it's available everywhere books are sold, but I know for a fact it's available on Amazon.com. And it's available at barnesandnoble.com. We did our first book signing at Barnes and Noble last Thursday night to a really nice crowd who showed up to hear Allison and me talk about the book and get signed copies of it. We're going to be, as a cast, and me individually, depending on what the event is, I'm going to be out throughout the summer and into the fall and into 2025. I mean, I think that the presentation of this book to people who might be interested is going to be an ongoing process for me. And I'm going to be there. And of course, I'm going to be talking about it extensively on social media. I have been talking about it a lot on social media, mine is official Dean Butler, and that's on Facebook, on Instagram, and TikTok. So, all things Little House, book-oriented things are all available through those handles on those three platforms. And we're talking to a growing number of people every day on those platforms. So I'm giving myself an opportunity to be seen and heard, Bill. I think that's really important with this. Is got to be talking to people in order to, and keep talking to them to encourage them to make that decision.
Well, Dean, I appreciate you taking time this evening to talk to me and talk to my audience. And I wish you the best of luck. And hopefully you'll be a #1 bestseller here real soon.
Wouldn't that be nice? But I'm grateful to be any kind of seller. And thank you for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you for listening to The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a $1 Million Baby production. For more information, go to thebillalexandershow.com.